This week on Quadriga, Turkish election, end of the Erdogan era? Turkey's ruling AKP party lost its absolute majority in national elections last weekend. In the future, it will not be able to govern alone. Attempts by President Recep Tayyip Erdogan to change Turkey's constitution to concentrate more power in his office have also failed. Is this the beginning of the end of the Erdogan era? Coming to you from Berlin, Quadriga, the international debate. Your host this week, Peter Craven.
Yes, hello and a very warm welcome to this latest edition of Quadriga, coming to you from the heart of the German capital, from the heart of Berlin. And we're addressing a fascinating question today. It is this: after the election in Turkey, is it the end of the Erdogan era? And to address that question and possibly even to try and answer it, I'm joined in the studio by three expert commentators. And without any further ado, I would like to introduce them to you. Beginning with Dilek, who is a specialist on Turkey at the Hertie School of Governance here in Berlin. She says that what we are seeing in Turkey is a transition to a truly representative parliamentary democracy and the end of one-man rule. Tom Goeller joins us also today. He has worked for many international media outlets. Currently, he's a freelance journalist and political analyst focusing on the US, Middle Eastern and security affairs. Erdogan, says Tom, will find a way to have the election repeated in the hope that his party can claw its way back to power. He's nodding, yeah? And last but not least, Ursula Weidenfeld, who's worked for a whole range of Germany's most prestigious business publications as an editor, an author and a prize-winning commentator. She believes that President Erdogan's AKP will never willingly release the reins of power. And she's smiling as we contemplate that thought. Dilek, I'd like to begin with you, if I might, with the big question that we're addressing today, the big central question: is this the end of the Erdogan era?
In a sense, yes. It's the end of a type of Erdogan era. He's not going to disappear from Turkey's political life, certainly not even in the medium term. He's there to stay, and I also agree with the statements made by my colleagues here that he will certainly do his best to cling to power. But on the other hand, it is the end of an era where we have we had the unaccountable, arbitrary one-man rule of Erdogan, where anything, in a way, went by. You know, he felt that he could do anything because he had the power to do it. What he lost now is the ability to change the constitution for a presidential system. His party lost qualified majority at the parliament, and they lost the single-party rule. And we have to remember that this is a young party, which was created right before they came to power. And in their 13 years of political experience, they've only known single-party rule. They don't have an experience of coalition. So it's psychologically a big defeat for the government and for Erdogan. Having said that, he will, of course, he will not be content with the limited, in his opinion, power and symbolic power that the president has in Turkey, although the president does have certain powers, but not enough executive powers. And, you know, he will, I guess from his perspective, there are still options, which include him coming back to head his party. Yeah,
well, that's what I was going to ask you. It's absolutely fascinating because the comments I've been reading, you know, how has Erdogan experienced the impact of this substantial defeat for himself? Some writers say he's been chastened, some writers say he's been sobered up by the experience. And I'm wondering what lessons he might have learned. And I wonder whether, you know, to use an expression, the leopard can change his spots, as it were.
As far as Erdogan is concerned, it's really difficult to expect that. I mean, based on looking at his sort of behavior, let's put it that way, his statements since the end of the election, since the election's results have come, seems like he's learned a lesson. He sort of understood what this means. He didn't speak at all for nearly 4 days, which of course is a record for a president, a politician who keeps talking basically. And in his written statement and also in his statement today, he for the first time publicly spoke. For the first time he spoke as the impartial president that he's supposed to be. But I mean, what else can he do at this moment, right? I think he's going to wait. But the problem is the stakes, it's not just his political ambitions to be the president, to have a presidential system, but also that there are serious corruption allegations against him, right? So, I mean, it's more than his political future that's at stake for him. And I think he will do his best to cling to power as much as he can. But of course, it will be more difficult for him now.
OK, let's bring the others in. Tom Goeller. I mean, Mr Erdogan has been a formidable election-winning machine down the years since he stood, I think it was 1994, for in the mayoral election in Istanbul, which, of course, he won. This has been his first big setback. What's your take on how big the setback is for him?
I agree that this is quite something for him. However, having observed him over all those years, he is someone who can regain ground. He is very popular still. Don't make a mistake that only because the AKP, his party, lost the majority doesn't mean that he is not very, very popular in Turkey. And he will find ways, maybe he had those 4 days to think about the ways to get his party back to power. One way simply could be that no coalition could be made out of this result. And then within 45 days, I think they have 45 days to form a new government. And if this fails, he most certainly would favor, and his AKP party, to go for another election in October.
You've talked about his standing in Turkey. Let's talk just a little bit about his standing internationally. I mean, let's be frank, you know, many people have qualms about Mr Erdogan for many very different reasons, but the fact of the matter is that the West, Washington and its allies, they prefer Mr Erdogan to anybody else or any other arrangement in sight.
Yeah, because he is also a figure for continuity, for stability, most certainly, which is extremely important for this part of the world. Look, Turkey is one of the oldest NATO partners, and Turkey always showed that it is a reliable partner. Under Erdogan's rule and influence, he developed different ideas within NATO than other NATO partners. However, one should not forget Turkey is the only country, the only state, the only member of NATO that really has a front line to a war, to a conflict for many years, since 2003, so to say.
OK, Ursula Weidenfeld, I'd like to hear your take on this. But I've got two headlines that I've written down. One was "Turkey has awoken!" ! And the other one from Time magazine, the kind of headline that we got all over the place, really. "The election loss for Erdogan is a victory for democracy." Is that how you see it?
Well, I think that is... I did see it, and we have similar headlines in Germany too. I think these are the hopes of people who are very hopeful to the development of Turkey, to a real democracy, to freedom of press, to freedom of people just expressing their views on things. And this was one of the first things everybody thought when he had heard about the outcome of the elections in Turkey. But the second thing was the question: how stable will Turkey be? How will it fulfill its role in the geopolitical scene region they are in? Will they be able to accept more than 2 million refugees they already have?
Good point.
And integrate them in
a huge
life.
task that the country is facing.
This is huge tasks, and nobody knows whether the smaller parties which are in parliament now, possibly in responsibility in a few weeks, will fulfill these responsibilities.
Yeah, and what we're also seeing is there's going to be wrangling over coalitions, possible coalitions. There's going to be possible gridlock in the system. There's possibly going to be new elections sometime down the road. You're an expert on business and finance, and we all know what that means is uncertainty, and that cannot be good for an economy that is already always described these days as a faltering economy.
Yes, it is. It's in a very sensible situation. We see that foreign investment is withdrawing for the past 2 or 3 years.
Which is a bit irrational, if I may interrupt.
Well, if you look at the monetary policy in the US, there are some reasons for that. But if you, Turkey is probably overinvested in the sense of just putting money in the real estate sector and things like that. But people are withdrawing their money. The stock market has gone down since the election. So everybody thinks that stability is the most important thing for Turkey. And if you look at the economic reforms, when Erdogan started, he was one of the big reformers, not only in terms of economy, but also in terms of society, of human rights, of women's rights. So people were quite, they rely on somebody who is able to not only think about reforms and democracy, but even is able to establish that.
Okay, so we've
and
got
he changed only for the last few years.
Yeah, so we've got the two poles in the discussion. We've got stability and we've got uncertainty. Dilek, is Turkey good at uncertainty?
Is it what?
Is it good at uncertainty?
No. I mean, Turkey, yeah.
I'm partly referring, of course, to the 1990s when there was, when there was so much uncertainty and the fact that coalition governments haven't really worked very well in Turkey down the years and so on.
Certainly, yeah. I mean, Turkey does have, Turkey doesn't have a good recollection of its experience with coalitions. But also, a lot has changed since then. I mean, when we look what has happened since 1999, first of all, we have the whole EU process, right? Democratization reform. There's been a democratization process which has started before AKP, although, of course, AKP was the biggest engine of that. Society has changed. Today in Turkey, the expectations of society, of all groups in society, are not the same as in the 90s. We now have a society which speaks up, which demands, which questions. And I think the election results show that. I mean, of course, I don't want to go to the other extreme of, painting a very rosy picture. We certainly are still far away from democratically being a mature society in the same sense. But I think now there is a growing understanding in Turkey that coalition doesn't necessarily mean instability. And you see this in the messages given by the opposition parties, but even by a few figures within the AKP. In the government, a few ministers said that, a sensible coalition which listens to the message that the electorate has given doesn't necessarily have to be unstable.
I see one more aspect concerning stability and instability. No matter who governs, no matter whether there is formed a coalition or not, this is because Turkey is a deeply divided society between modern, westernized or Western-thinking Turks who also feel very national or nationalistic, not only westernized, but they speak up, as you said, for a new Turkey and speak out and women's rights and equality on the one hand. And on the other hand, it's a strong Islamization. Way before, by the way, Erdogan came to power. This already started in the, I think, in the 70s. Are the early roots of a re-Islamization, of anti-Kemalism, right? And what we experience today also in the whole Islamic world is this re-Islamization. And didn't Mr. Erdogan also win elections and popularity with his dream, which he most certainly will not forsake, to re-establish a kind of new Ottoman Empire?
I think we need to be a bit more nuanced, I would say, in our understanding of why AKP has had so much support. We cannot discount the socioeconomic factors. This is a government that has delivered services that no other government has done before. They've really done quite a bit in health, education, and transportation areas. Now that there are new roads, everything is accessible, people have free health care, etc. And in a society where a majority are still, in sort of lower socioeconomic status, this is important. Certainly, also, of course, at least in the first and a half, let's say, AKP term, the human rights reforms, the democratization reforms also mattered. Certainly, I do agree with you that certainly Turkey is a very divided society, and it's not just AKP. You also have to count on it the votes of the nationalist MHP. So together they make sort of around 70%, and you can't underestimate that because this 70%, most of that are conservative and not necessarily very sympathetic of women's liberation, etc. But you also have the other, let's say 30%. So it is a divided society. It's not the only divided society. It's very much like the US in a way. But that's why it's important. That's why consensus and deliberation and democracy and talking is important. That's why I think coalition will not, if they can achieve it, it's a big if, of course, wouldn't necessarily be a bad thing. I think it will be a very good thing, really, because it would give at least the rest of the, sort of like that 30% also a voice.
It would be a step forward for Turkey, but would it be a step forward it would be a step forward for democracy in Turkey, but would it be a step forward for Turkey too? And I think that's a big question foreigners ask, and even the Turkish people ask now when they were, to me, it seemed that they were a little bit shocked about the outcome of the election.
Why wouldn't it be? You mean for the economy? Why wouldn't it be a step for Turkey?
The question is, when you have two parties which both are not experienced in doing a coalition and just coming along with each other, there will be instability in political terms, in political decisions and things like that. And the question is whether Turkey can manage this form of instability in a time when it, on the other hand, is confronted with refugees, which with a very unstable surrounding, being in an area which is at a very critical situation right now.
But look at how far Germany has come since the Second World War, since the end of the Cold War. I mean, who would have imagined, right, that the East, you now have a prime minister and a president, a chancellor and a president who come from the East,
but I think the situation was a little bit different because the European Union at that time was a stable frame for just reunification, for coming together to transform societies and to come together with West and Eastern Germany. So if you do it in a framework which is reliable, which is transparent, which is just not to be changed at the same time, I think it's an easier job than the Turkish jobs are now.
Well, but I mean, okay, I think we have to first agree on a principle that democracy matters, right? We have a situation where the electorate clearly gave a message, and I think I also have problems. I'm not sure whether Erdogan is still very as favored by the West as he was until the late 2000s.
The West is not as favored as it was by Erdogan.
No, but I mean, I think he's. In the past couple of years, his legitimacy as a political leader has been quite questionable here. I think what matters more than the interest of the Western powers is democracy in Turkey, and I see this as a healthy. And I don't think that we have to necessarily think that a coalition government wouldn't be better placed than the AKP in addressing these problems. We should not forget that the economic growth that everyone talks about in Turkey also came at the expense of huge economic income gap. Unemployment is still very high. There's huge corruption allegations against this government, and we have faced an increasingly autocratic, authoritarian government rule, which no one in Turkey really deserves, right? I mean, Turkey doesn't have to have AKP just because it's better for the economy or because the West wants stability.
OK, fascinating thoughts from both of you there. You're talking a little bit about the legacy of the Erdogan years, and we're going to have to talk a little bit more about that. I'd first like to just take a little bit of a break from the conversation and let's go back and have a look at President Erdogan's successes earlier in his time in office. Let's just remember that he served 3 terms as Prime Minister before last year becoming Turkish president. Let's have a look at this report.
Erdogan stands for stability. His party, the AKP, came to power in 2002 and has since had an absolute majority. Erdogan ended decades of political instability in a Turkey marked by a shifting landscape of coalitions. Erdogan stands for modernization. Under his leadership, Turkey has experienced an unparalleled building boom. Infrastructure has improved, and the country has become more open and attractive to investors. Erdogan also liberalized the employment market. GDP tripled during his terms in office. Erdogan stands for reconciliation. He was the first Turkish leader to reach out to the country's Kurdish minority, albeit cautiously, lifting the official ban on the language and making peace with militant rebels. Without Erdogan's policies, the pro-Kurdish HDP's success could never have happened.
Dilek, there are many people in Turkey who claim that Recep Tayyip Erdogan has been the most successful Turkish leader since Kemal Atatürk.
I guess we can say that.
You're nodding. Yeah, it's fascinating, isn't it? Because, again, once again, I'm going to use that word. There are lots of people who have qualms about Mr. Erdogan, but he is a towering figure in recent Turkish history and in the Turkish history of the last 100 years, really.
Mm-hmm. I mean, you have to give him, the credit that he deserves. Certainly, he's a very successful politician. He's mobilized millions. He's a very strong leader. Etc. All of that, yeah. But of course, partly it also was it was not just Erdogan himself, right? There was a movement in society, in the world, globalization. Turkey was part of a movement. Think what happened here in the 90s in Europe, etc. And there was, the society was changing. You had the Kurds pushing for change, etc. And he emerged out of this sort of social dynamics. And I think by the way, I should correct that AKP didn't decriminalize the Kurdish language. The ban on the Kurdish language was lifted before. What that they've done
is associated with Mr. Erdogan as one of his major achievements, though. He has, we view Mr. Erdogan, lots of liberals view President Erdogan as illiberal, but his position on the Kurds and the Kurdish language has been very liberal.
Yes, but that started already before his term. And certainly, yes, so much has changed. Today, we speak in Turkey, well, maybe less freely now, but on the questions like the Armenian genocide, the Kurdish question, etc. The change is incredible. You cannot deny that. But you also have to see the reverse trend that has been happening, not just in the last 3 years, since 2006. When you look at the legal changes that introduced in the police law, in the anti-terror law, the penal code, all of that happened in 2005, 2006, in front of the EU, right? Right after EU opened the accession negotiations and was tolerated by the EU. And I think we need to really sort of refresh our memories in our reading of the government and also of the EU's responsibility in that. So I guess in summing up, I would say, I've spent nearly a decade in Turkey, very much part of this democratization process, supporting the government's reforms. They have certainly done quite a bit in relation to future past governments, but they could have done much more. They had the means, they had the social support, they had the single-party rule, they had the EU accession process, but they stopped. Just because Erdogan and his party didn't need to go any further for their own personal interests.
Tom, I'd like to draw on your foreign policy expertise and your expertise in the region. If Mr. Erdogan a slow demise is beginning, what might that mean for Turkish foreign policy? Let's begin by talking about Israel. There was a headline in the Jerusalem Post: the election was bad for Erdogan, but good for Israel.
Right. As much as we can praise Erdogan for many things in his domestic politics, he is a loser, a failure in foreign politics. Not so much because he is doing bad politics, but he is selling his ideas badly, because he has an anger problem. He is very often too loud, or too edgy. And yes, he run down the relationship with Israel. He did so with Egypt. You can go around through the neighborhood. With whom did he not quarrel, so to speak? The only problem states I acknowledge as a problem that is not caused by him is Syria and Iraq.
When we talk about Syria, he's been very heavily criticised recently for allowing so many jihadist would-be terrorists to actually pass through Turkey on the way to Syria, to stream into Syria and Iraq as well.
He followed a different strategy than the NATO partners, because for him, Assad is the dictator of Syria, is the first target to go for. And this is where he disagrees with NATO, because NATO didn't find a common view on how to deal with Assad. Actually, NATO decided, or the West decided, to let him be there. And for Erdogan, this is no option. And this is the real reason why he supported the IS. Now he has a problem he partly supported, and that grew out of his control. And he kind of rolled back already at the last NATO summit in Antalya last month. However, this is a crucial point of view we really need to understand in the West, where I think Erdogan is not wrong, because it is very difficult to find a strategy. What do you do with Syria? It's a failed state. You have a dictator still in power, and you have Islamist fundamentalists fighting this dictator. And the West sits back and has no strategy. Yes, Mr. Erdogan is right to demand one, and he doesn't get a response from NATO. So he developed an own strategy. Right or wrong, at least he tried it.
The response from the West to a lot of what you're saying has been to use... Dilek, I'd be very interested in what you have to say about this. You often hear President Erdogan described as an Ottoman sultan or as a pasha, or even the word caliph has been used, I've seen, yeah? What's your response? Is that in any way useful or relevant? Are those terms that are used in the internal Turkish discourse to criticise President Erdogan?
I mean, he does. He and Davutoglu, both of them, do aspire, and very explicitly, publicly, aspire to the sort of good old days of the Ottoman Empire, right? They are very Ottoman. They glorify Ottoman Empire, however they understand it. But I think, you know, all these adjectives, it depends on how, you know, you interpret them. I think I would use the word, you know, he's a very authoritarian leader who has done, you know, quite a bit initially for democratization, partly because of self-interest, partly because he believed it's good for the economy, etc. But at the end of the day, he's a very autocratic leader. But in terms of those adjectives, I think the signs of why he may be called that way are plentiful. His son-in-law has just been elected to the parliament from AKP. And we know that Erdogan himself, although he's supposed to be an impartial president, he actually confessed this, you know, sort of prepared the lists of the candidates. His family, his children, both of his children, are very much involved in political affairs, although they don't have any political representative capacity. His son travels the world, makes political statements, and the whole family is very involved, you know, involved in these corruption allegations. So in that sense, I mean, there is certainly something sort of Padishah-like in a way, in that he feels unaccountable. And you see that in the way he built this mega palace, despite a court order. He's sitting, you know, just because he wanted, he's sitting in an illegal building which has 1,150 rooms, and at a time where the Turkish economy has slowed down, right? So he's completely unaccountable.
Let me pick up on that, and we'll come back to it in just a second. We're going to get a little report again, because I mean you've been hearing what we've been saying here. Mr. Erdogan is without a doubt somebody who views himself as very much a special one, somebody who is almost beyond criticism. Let's get some impressions, some images now, and then we'll return to the conversation.
Erdogan, high-handed and self-indulgent. He built a new presidential palace for himself while in office in the midst of a nature reserve, even though a court refused to grant him a permit. And he's also been taken to task for his stance on freedom of speech. The AKP came down hard on protests like those in Gezi Park. Critics have been arrested and silenced. And Erdogan adopts an offended tone when criticized by leaders from other countries, like German President Joachim Gauck.
Recently, however, we have also heard voices expressing disappointment, bitterness, and outrage over a style of leadership which to many appears to threaten democracy. For instance, when citizens have a certain way of living their lives imposed on them, when their lives risk being more strictly controlled by the intelligence services, when religion is abused to serve political ends. when street protests are violently repressed and people even lose their lives in the process.
You have to act as a statesman. He probably still views himself as a pastor, because he used to be one. But this is unacceptable. The tendencies are unacceptable.
Are the Turks turning away from an increasingly authoritarian leader?
Good question. An increasingly authoritarian leader, perhaps, who certainly has built a very big palace for himself. We had it was 1,000 rooms in the palace in that report. I think it's actually, you were mentioning it, it's actually a higher number. Mr. Erdogan,
1,150.
he corrected that and he said, no, it's 1,150 at least, I think he said, yeah? Ursula, why did he do it? Why did he build it? It seems like the most incredibly crazy thing to have done, because that must have led to the outcome of the election as well, in part.
Yes, I think he had the feeling that he himself has to make a statement, that he has to establish something which stands for his presidency, which is not to be wiped away by elections or anything else. So he had the feeling that he has to manifest himself in Turkey in a way which can't be wiped out by anybody. And the second thing is, you mentioned the allegations against corruption, against his family, against his son, and he has to stick in this presidential attitude, because every coalition partner he could find would raise the things again and put it on the table and ask, well, should we have allegations against corruption, even if the family of the president is touched by it? And I think this is are the two reasons why Erdogan sticks with his attitude, with his being a sultan or whatever, and can't turn away from it.
It's interesting you mentioned that word sultan. For me, he seems more like a figure in a Greek or Shakespearean
like
tragedy who's almost sort of, triggered his own downfall by his foolish acts in some ways. Well, with the palace building thing and other moves.
Don't let us forget, he is he comes from a very normal family, from a very normal area, and he had a hard way to fight himself up, so to speak. And you can find this in history very often. Then those people, either they stick to their ordinary way of life or they become over the top. But what I find way more important for the election result, for the outcome of the election, is not so much whether he built this gigantic palace. It is none of us here, if we would be in Turkey, could sit here, we would be incarcerated, we would be put to jail because he stopped freedom of speech. And this is, I think, a very deep-going authoritarian act. None of the young people can use the internet as we can here, and we all know this is very important. So I think an 18-year-old did not, for him or for the 18-year-olds or 21-year-olds, was not so much important how many rooms this palace has. They don't have access to the internet as they want to. They can speak out as they want to. And the colleagues I know in Turkey, they all say we use self-censorship to survive. So there is actually the root of, I think, the outcome of this election.
Okay, clearly repressive policies against the media. I want to move on to another aspect, Dilek, of the whole discussion. Let's talk about the Kurdish minority in Turkey. We say minority, it's 15 million people or so, yeah? You have written a lot, I know, about what is sometimes called the Kurdish question. What is the Kurdish question?
Well, of course, it's a deeply rooted historical question. It dates back to the late Ottoman era, but very simply put, it is the inability. It's a question of a people's fight for cultural recognition and self-rule against a state which has denied any cultural recognition to them and applied all kinds of repressive policies ranging from forced exiles to imprisonments, extrajudicial killings to forced displacement in the last more than 100 years, right? It's not just the republic, it's not just the sort of couple of 30 years. So in a nutshell, the Kurdish question is a fight between basically a society and a state, a group of people and a state, for equality and dignity and recognition. Of course, part of it is an armed conflict, right? The Kurdish question was there before the PKK. PKK is an outcome of it, but certainly PKK has changed the outcome considerably. Yeah. I think we have to accept that had there not been an armed conflict, an armed movement, an armed mobilization on the part of the Kurds, today the Kurds would not be in the parliament. That's clear.
You realise that's a very controversial statement, because that is it's a call to arms.
It is not. That's not. No, this is analysis. It is not. You have to. You can look at the IRA, right? I mean, you have to see things as they are. And I think the most monumental outcome of the elections, as far as I see it, one, of course, is sort of stopping Erdogan and AKP's one-party rule, but the fact that the Kurdish movement has passed the 10% electoral threshold. I mean, the significance of this cannot be overstated. This is a movement who saw 5 of their political parties dissolved by the Constitutional Court, hundreds of its members, politicians, mayors killed, lost, disappeared, imprisoned, and which ran for the elections against all odds, right? They couldn't, for example, because they're a new party, they couldn't benefit from treasury aid that's given to all political parties, et cetera, et cetera. And there was even a European Court of Human Rights ruling, which found Turkey right in this issue. So this is really amazing that the Kurds now are in the parliament. The Kurdish movement is.
And the leader of the Kurdish HDP party is Selahattin Demirtas, and we need to talk about him because he's a very interesting figure. We haven't brought him into the discussion yet. So let's do that. Let's get a short report on who he is and what he's all about. Yeah.
Together with supporters, the charismatic co-leader of the HDP, Selahattin Demirtas, celebrated the entrance of a pro-Kurdish party into the Turkish parliament for the first time. HDP followers held up the countenance of Abdullah Öcalan. The imprisoned head of the militant Turkish PKK organization is the real winner in this election. Öcalan is viewed as one of the founders of the HDP. His strategic goal was to bring his movement and leftist Turks under one roof. Some of the party's functionaries have described themselves as socialist and anti-capitalist. In a printed statement, Öcalan called the HDP the historic heir of a revolutionary struggle. Is accepting the HDP in parliament a step forward for Turkish democracy?
Tom, you were just saying you've got a very important point you want to make before we move on.
Yeah, actually, I find it incredible thinking about the turnout of this election of 85%. And Turkey actually showed the West what democracy is. And Turkey can be very proud of the Turkish people, no matter to which party they belong and for whom they voted for. Because old Europe, as Mr. Rumsfeld called it many years ago, has also become old and old-fashioned and boring in elections. And through Turkey, we can learn a lesson. And this is really something we need to acknowledge.
And one person who captured the Turkish imagination, captured the imagination of the voters, was Mr. Demirtas, yeah?
Correct.
Was he on your radar before the election?
Not at all.
Ah, was he on your radar, Ursula?
No, he wasn't.
Aha. Go on, then.
But I thought before the election that there would be something like a left-wing party to establish in Turkey, and he was the one who did it and who was quite good and broadened the basis of the Turkish party.
I would rather say a liberal party.
You're the expert, Dilek. Tell us.
Well, it's interesting to hear that because he's been on the radar of us in Turkey. I mean, me personally longer because I know him, I know the movement, I know the leaders in that party quite well. But even for the general public, at least since the presidential elections, he was one of the candidates who ran against Erdogan. And he himself, with his campaign, in a very short time, increased the votes of his party from 6.5 or so until to 9.5 or 6 or so, right? He himself made that difference. And here, you know, exponential. I mean, Demirtas certainly was a big factor.
And very important is that he is not just representing the Kurdish population. He has a very inclusive message, yeah?
Yep.
Yes.
Can you describe that for us?
Well,
Yeah.
I mean, the party HDP itself is a new party. The Kurdish party changed its name and party and program with the claim of being a party for whole Turkey, and they basically brought together a national umbrella coalition, bringing together women's group, LGBT individuals, environmentalists, workers, socialists, liberals, workers, etc., and all minorities, ethnic and religious minorities, LGBTI people, and, you know, you see this among their candidates too, and also among the elected parliamentarians.
So is this the future? Can this party now broaden out from these, 13% to become a sort of a 30%, 40% party in Turkey?
I very much hope so. I mean, of course, that's a big challenge for them now, to broaden that. But they started very strong. They more than doubled their votes. And they got votes from Turks, from educated, you know, Gezi people, from people who've never voted for the Kurdish parties before.
They have to show now that they are able to handle the success, that they are able to be a coalition partner, that they have a political program which is not only a promise but even something which is can become reality, and that is the great challenge for all new parties. We see that in even nearly every country in Europe, that new parties probably will go down within the next 2 or 3 years when they can't deliver. And if they deliver, they will have a potential to just grow up.
They're a new party, but a very old movement.
You're right. Yeah.
And Mr. Demirtas has the title, it's fascinating, as the Kurdish Obama. It's being repeated all over. Is he worth it?
Oh, I hope he's much better than being the Kurdish Obama. I mean, Obama is such a big disillusionment. No, I mean, of course, it's popularity and stuff. No, but Demirtas is, you know, I think he will... I believe in him very much.
OK, we're getting towards the end of the show. I have to ask the question we asked at the top of the show, Ursula. Is this the end of the Erdogan era?
It is probably not.
Probably not, yeah. Because he's going to fight very, very hard to stay in power?
He will fight to stay in power. He will go for new elections if he can.
He'll bend the rules. He'll move the goalposts.
Probably will, yes.
Could this be the beginning of the end for Mr. Erdogan?
It could be, but it remains to be seen. And he is a good old fox who knows how to claw his way back to power.
That's right.
For his party.
Yeah, a wily character. More hope or more anxiety for you, Dilek, as a person, and the people you know, your family, your friends? What are people feeling at this point in time?
I and so many people that I know, we've never felt hope and optimism about our country's future for such a long time. Certainly, I'm very hopeful.
That's a very happy word to finish on. Thanks very much indeed to all three of you. Time to say bye-bye now. Do get in touch with us if you want to send us a message by Twitter, Facebook, email, whatever. For now, bye-bye and tschüss.